This is Jenny Kreisman interviewing Mohammad Moussa. We are in the undergraduate library on the campus of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And this is our second interview. And We're very much looking forward to it.
Cool.
Okay, so last time we talked a lot about you as a person and how you self-identify and things like that, and just kind of your identity and your background. But this time I definitely like to talk about things that you're passionate about and things that you've been involved with. And I know specifically we've talked about poetry, we've talked about Poetic Portraits of a Revolution, we've talked about your opinions about what's going on currently and what's been going on in the Middle East. So I'd really like to delve into all of those things. Where would you prefer to begin?
Anywhere that you'd like. I know that a lot of times people ask about the poetry project and what that's like.
Let's talk about that then.
Okay, sure. So in about February of 2011, Will McInerney and Kane Smigo were thinking of starting a poetry project. And originally, like before February, they were thinking of going maybe to South Africa and using poetry as a means of documenting current events, etc. But then when the uprising started to take place in Egypt and in Tunisia, they thought it would be a great idea to head up north a little bit and use spoken word poetry to sort of capture the human element behind the revolution. And so they needed a translator and someone maybe with an artistic background as a translator, as well as a photographer and a videographer. So they contacted me about me, and I knew them through the poetry scene about joining the project as another poet as well as the translator. Because I'm fluent in Arabic. And then we were looking for a photographer. I knew Samir, and other people had suggested Samir through mutual friends with Kane.
What's Samir's last name?
Abdul Khana. Yeah. And so probably around March, the four of us sort of got together as, okay, this is the team, and we started planning this project. And so the short gist of it was, like I said, using spoken word poetry. And we really wanted to get the human and emotional elements behind these revolutions and bring them back home sort of to raise international awareness about these situations. We felt like a lot of times the current media, they have these zoomed out images of these events from different places around the world, and they use those zoomed out images to sort of understand an entire group of people, and that model fails a lot of the times because using a soundbite or a snippet from a protest, you can't really fully understand what's going on in people's minds. So what we wanted to do was sort of get a wide spectrum of people who were old, young activists, people who were for the revolution, against the revolution, and talk about their everyday stories. Because we felt like through people's stories we can better understand people as much as we could, or as best as we could. And adding the photography and videography element to sort of put a face to it. So that's what we did. In March we started the fundraising process, and we fundraised about $19,000 for airfare, having a place to stay in a safe area, some extra equipment, and things like that, and food, of course, on the ground. And so we did that. We stayed a month in Egypt and a month in Tunisia, interviewed about 65 to 70 people total, and every week we would use those interviews to write poetic reflections, and we sent them back to WUNC, which is the local NPR affiliate here in North Carolina. And so every week they would air, on Friday morning, they would air our poem on Morning Edition. And two of those poems were aired nationally with Dick Gordon's This Story, which was really cool for us to have. And this was all during our stay there. Once we came back, we used those poems as well as the video and photography to set up a couple of extra things. One of them is a photo exhibit that we've had in a couple of places. The main one is this performance called Snapshots, which incorporates the poems that we wrote, 6 of the 7 poems. As well as video and pictures in the background, and sort of like a presentation, 45 minutes long. We do a Q&A after. And then the other one, which is the big one, is a theater performance play, which incorporates a lot more than just those poems, but also some of the broader ideas that we had. And we had with the Arts Center, we did like a 2-week run of that. I think it was 6 performances.
Were you acting in it, or was it just like spoken word performance?
So I wasn't able to be involved in it because we wanted to tour it around, and because of my master's program and things like that, it was just Will and Kane as part of that. I was part of Snapshots though. But yes, Will and Kane were acting in it, but it was a poetry-led performance, so it's not really like acting through just dialogue and things like that, but it's like basically a poetry theatrical performance with images and videos like being projected, and we had a local artist called Apple Juice Kid, who's a producer, write the soundtrack for it as well. produce the soundtrack for it. And so yeah, that's what we did, and it's been great. We've performed snapshots at UNC, Duke, NC State multiple times, and in Asheville, University of Asheville, Guilford, and DC actually. And right now we're in talks with the Smithsonian of probably bringing us in during February to perform there. So it was great to be able to perform all these different places and sort of share our ideas and our stories.
And what was the reception like for that?
It was great. I mean, it's such a concentrated thing. You know, you're trying to have 2 months worth of experiences, summing them up into this 45-minute chunk. But people were very inspired by it, but also it was very like thought-provoking. You know, hearing all these different ideas. For some people, hearing it in a different way from just what they've already heard of it beforehand, especially through poetry. You know, and through these real stories with real people. A lot of times it might be just ideas. You know, the idea of someone's kid being shot, but now you had a face to it, a real person whose kid had been shot and killed, and you have the face in the story as we're saying it. So it's more of a tangible sort of storytelling.
And then what was the most significant part of it for you being there?
So you learn a lot. The whole process was very reflective because you're there and you're constantly in this mindset of, okay, talking to people, but also observing it in such a way that I'm going to be writing poetry about them, you know, when I come back to the apartment or tomorrow. And so the whole time you're sort of in this observational mode and reflective mode. So because of that, you're always constantly thinking on this deeper level, sort of, not just about the experiences around you, but maybe about your own personal life and things like that. So for me, I think the most significant aspect is that because you were in that mode for 2 months, you're constantly reflecting and thinking about the power of storytelling or the power of people's stories. You know, a lot of times you'd like to hypothesize over someone's experiences and be like, well, no, I think that these people have this, and that as issues, or they need to do this, and that. But it's like, no, like, listen, instead of just pretending that you know things about someone, go and ask them or talk to them. So that was really powerful.
And then how did people there perceive what you were doing?
Yeah, so it's different. In Egypt, there was this fear of spies. There was a spy that they had caught very soon before we had arrived on the ground. So because we were sort of these foreigners that were, you know, asking people on the street for interviews or going to protests and filming, there was this sort of like tense atmosphere. But the people who really understood what our project was about were very, very helpful, extremely thankful. In Tunisia, for example, one woman that we interviewed whose son had been killed, she was so happy that we actually were asking about her son's story. She felt like a lot of people sort of ignored her son's story, and she was super thankful that we sat down and were just asking her about her son's story. So for the most part, people who understood that we weren't spies and what our project was about were really thankful and appreciative. And at the end of the day, we weren't there as like, you know, on a high horse or whatever. We were really there just to learn from people, and so we tried to do our best to convey that, to just be like, you know, we really want to just hear your stories to learn and raise awareness back home.
Mm-hmm. And then going into it, did you have any preconceived notions or ideas of what it was going to be like that was then, after being there, just completely changed?
Yeah, so I think all four of us went in there with the mindset of, you know, revolutions are sort of romanticized a lot of the times, and we don't want to go in there with that mindset. We wanted to go in with sort of, as best as we could, a blank slate of like, you know, we don't really know or understand fully what's going on, and that's why we're there. And so, but part of the goals of the project was to sort of change people's perception of that romanticized revolution of like, you know, people protest on the street for a couple of days, the dictator falls, the revolution ends, whereas it's sort of like some of the hardest work that has to happen is after the dictator falls. So we went in with that mentality.
That's good. And you feel like that's kind of what you saw and experienced while you were there?
Yeah, is that revolutions are extremely complicated things. You know, uprisings are very complicated things, and they're not one-dimensional. You can't summarize them with a soundbite. You can't summarize them with a clip from a protest. They have so many different levels and layers, and all we wanted to do was try to capture some of those levels and some of those layers, and not say that, oh, we spent a month in Egypt, now we're experts on the revolution, but through our month in Egypt, this is what we heard, this is what we experienced, and we're trying to convey those emotions of the stories to you, and you can do the rest of the analysis for yourself. Yeah.
And so overall, do you feel like it was a success? What the project set out to do, what it accomplished?
I hope so. You know, that's the hope, of course, is that it was successful. I think that we did raise awareness. The issue a lot of times with projects like these is you can very easily preach to the choir in a way. You know, your audience, the people that are going to come to a Poetic Portraits of a Revolution show might already sort of be within that mindset, that open mindset. And so we perhaps give a fuller image, a more clear image for people, for that audience, which is great, which I think would be a success. You know, yeah, I feel like so many people after the shows will come up to us and be like, "That's so inspiring," and I think, you know, in those moments you feel like, yeah, that's awesome that project was able to do that.
And did you have what were your sponsorship? You said you had did fundraising. Did NPR sponsor or did
so WUNC's sponsorship was in that we're going to trust these 4 random people, you know, and air their poems if the poems are good enough. And so that was how their support came in. The Duke Center for Documentary Film Studies lent us some audio equipment to use. For example, CGI, the Center for Global Initiatives at UNC, provided us with donations. We did our own fundraisers where we asked the wider community to sort of contribute, which was the vast majority of where the money came from. So it was a lot of different places where we got the funding from.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And then as the last question on that, if you could just talk about your role as translator,
yeah,
and how that made your experience a little bit different than everyone else's who was there.
Yeah, so the Egyptian accent's a little bit different than the Lebanese accent, but I'm used to it. But the Tunisian accent was completely different, and it took me like 4 days just to understand what was going on, and it was hard sometimes for people to understand me. But yeah, so you're a translator, so you're, you know, while handling the poetry aspect, you're also handling the translation aspect day to day. My voice went out because of the travel the first week or so, the first 5 days or so in Egypt. So I was there without a voice. Of course, we had some contacts there that were helping us, so it wasn't that bad. But yeah, basically, like, my communication was completely gone for 5 days, and we had a poem due. So the first poem, if you listen to it online, my voice is still like halfway gone, and just completely. And we wrote a line in the poem to sort of talk about how my voice went out, and I say, and it's ironic that I'm losing my voice. Maybe it's just preparing me to listen. But yeah, I mean, it was great. So you're translating a lot of people, especially in Egypt, knew English. So a lot of our interviews were in English.
Okay.
But for the ones that weren't, or for our day-to-day interactions of going around taxis and things like that, I would be translating and talking to people.
And then the other group members were there for, well, Kane and Will were there for the poetry aspect and for being present, and then...
Right, and Samir was the photographer and videographer.
Okay.
Yeah, so he handled both the still pictures and photography as well as the video aspects.
And were you able to get all that media back when it was taken? Or?
Yeah, so we had 2 hard drives with us and the laptop. We had a laptop that we would, to edit things. And so all of everything was on those 3, storage devices or whatever. And the way we did it was, I think we put one hard drive in someone's suitcase, the other in another's, and the laptop in someone else's, just in case. And we had letters from like Congress folks saying like, okay, we understand that they're doing this project, and we would ask the TSA or whatever to not separate them from their equipment. But we went without a hitch. It was completely fine, and we have all of the both hard drives and the laptop with us to this day.
Do you have like a favorite funny story or experience from where that you like to tell people about?
Yeah, there's a lot. One of them that we talk about is in Tunisia. So in Tunisia, there's sort of like, the cops aren't huge fans of reporters in general. So one day we heard that there was this protest going on in a certain area in the capital, Tunis, and so we went there. And so we were on the street in the beginning. There was like a blockade to go to the main square where the protests were taking place. So while we were on the street, we were sort of just, these random kids came up, like 14-year-olds, and they were asking us what we were doing. And so we decided to like interview them on the street. As we're doing this, there's this guy that seems like he's sort of jogging, and then he's coming crossing the street, and at one point he turns directly towards Samir, who's holding the camera, and grabs Samir from the back and grabs onto the camera. Then this van pulls up, and more people come out,